RJ Sermon's reclassifying from 2026 to 2025. So, all right, it's an added piece to the puzzle for the 2025 roster, but it's a freshman, and so people might be skeptical. Well, just how much can one freshman really add to a defense? Just how much of a difference can one person make? I think that's the question a lot of USC football fans would want answered. So, Ethan, what's your answer? What's your initial perspective on the real significance of RJ Sermon's reclassifying for 2025 at USC?
Well, I wouldn't expect him to be the kind of difference maker that completely transforms the USC defense, but I do think that it's a positive move both for him and for the team. When I look at USC's roster at corner, I don't see a crazy amount of depth behind some of the older guys like DJ Harvey and Prophet Brown and DeCarlos Nicholson. So, he is a guy that I think could step in and make an impact, especially being a 4-star, 5-star on some outlets, ranked pretty high coming out of high school. And I think it's also good for him just because that 2026 recruiting class is really stacked. This allows him to come in a bit early. The 2025 class is nowhere near as strong. He gets to establish himself before he has his peers, competitors coming in and, trying to earn some of those spots. And he gets to get, a year's head start in the system, gets to a year's head start with these coaches, building that relationship and kind of separating himself in that way. So I think it could be a good move for both sides for sure.
I think one notable follow-up is just that within the workings of D'Anton Lynn's scheme, and obviously with Doug Belk still aboard coaching the defensive backs and mindful of what we saw last season, how important is it that USC is getting reinforcements specifically in the secondary? Because with the scheme, there aren't as many linebackers as in other defensive schemes. So like maybe having that reinforcement come in the secondary as opposed to, let's say, linebacker, defensive line kind of being a separate issue. But the fact that it's on the back end of the defense rather than at, say, linebacker or, any other position group we could select on offense, how much does it matter that it's in the secondary specifically that USC is getting a depth piece for this season and not waiting until 2026?
I think it's important. And I think that we talked a little bit about the linebacker position also being one that was kind of a little light coming into the spring transfer window. And obviously they added Kennedy Urlacher from Notre Dame. So they tried to shore that up a little bit. Again, Kennedy Urlacher is not a defense-changing move, but he is a guy that I think a lot of people expect to make somewhat of an impact and hopefully, see the field in 2025. So I think, he's a guy who has been pretty widely regarded as a true lockdown corner and has a lot of pretty natural raw skills in terms of like speed and agility and all of those things. So I think that, especially him being kind of raw and also a guy who has the potential to really make wide receivers work, it makes it even more kind of enticing and interesting to get him in here early for sure.
Yeah, in terms of my general take on this, I mean, I'm not going to claim to be an RJ Sermon's expert. Like, I don't do deep dives into high school film. I have so many college sports writing jobs that, I just can't go down these recruiting evaluation rabbit holes. But I will say this, and you did allude to it briefly. We're all excited about the 2026 class, rightly so. Not saying or implying that we shouldn't be. But there is a kind of a sense of, wait, there is this 2025 season first. And just in terms of, it's just pure resource allocation. To have a little bit of resource allocation rerouted to 2025, that's important. Like that is needed. And we get another guy in the system so that when we get to 2026, RJ Sermons will already have a year in D'Anton Lynn's system. That's one guy you won't have to be coaching up from scratch next season he's getting into the program. So like that really helps the project, because while we're all focused on 2026 for all the understandable, legitimate, valid reasons, 2025 needs to be good. I mean, and I know that Lincoln Riley's going to get a 2026 season, barring something really awful, barring something really bad. He now has a much longer leash, because they're not going to have this huge recruiting class and then not allow him to coach it. So barring something really improbable, Lincoln Riley is going to be coaching next year. Like, that basically cooled down his hot seat. USC's administrative changes and subsequent recruiting success. But all that being said, even though Lincoln Riley doesn't have nearly as hot a seat this season, like, in order for that 2026 class to A, be as good as we hope it will be, but B, to retain commitments. We're going to talk about a prominent decommitment in a little bit, but like this 2025 season needs to create at least some sense that this is going in the right direction. If 2025 falls flat, the feelings about 2026 might not remain intact. So I think just getting RJ Sermons doesn't have to be spectacular. If he's just a good, coachable young player who goes through, let's say, a normal progression, normal in the sense of, all right, might start slow in September, but mid-October, he really begins to pick things up. And by November, he is just crushing it. Like, if he's that kind of freshman, that's a real plus. That's a significant plus for USC, because then that 2026 defensive roster will just feel so much more solidified. So I'm not saying anything revolutionary, but I do think that is kind of the essence of what RJ Sermons brings to USC. Ethan, I think the other follow-up question I would ask is just, you've had time to kind of digest the pickups, the additions in the portal, the recruiting class. I mean, RJ Sermons is basically a recruiting pickup for 2025. Just, it's done in an unconventional way. But you had a chance to kind of toss these things around and get a sense of how the defensive roster is shaping up. Where do you assess kind of the weak points, the concerns, the kinds of things that fans need to be particularly concerned about is with summer camp now? We're almost in June. Like, we are getting there. Summer camp not too far away. What's your overall assessment of where the defensive roster stands right now?
Well, first, a brief note on RJ Sermons, just because what you were saying made me think of something, which is that the pure fact that he wants to be here this early is a pretty positive sign, because I think a way that you could look at it if you're RJ Sermons is, especially because, he was class of 2026. So, I can wait another year. I can come in with this 2026 recruiting class that's supposed to be so good and have another year kind of on the back end and on the momentum of eligibility to hopefully pursue a national championship. But he seems ready to come to USC now, and he seems confident enough in himself to come to USC now, which is kind of an encouraging sign. I mean, you want guys who want to get here as soon as possible, want to make an impact, and want to take on challenges even when the roster doesn't appear quite as constructed to compete for a national title like it will next year. So I think that that's a good sign, and I like that. I'm kind of glad that I thought of it as you were going through your progression of your thoughts on